Money whispers, but true wealth rarely needs to say a word. When a dust-covered Hell's Angel parked his beat-up Harley outside California's most exclusive country club, an arrogant millionaire couple ruthlessly mocked him. They laughed, called him trash, and demanded his removal, completely unaware they were standing on his driveway. The afternoon sun was beating down relentlessly on the Pacific Coast Highway when Jackson Montgomery finally pulled into the grand, sweeping driveway of the Crestwood estate. The ocean breeze carried the sharp scent of salt and eucalyptus, mixing with the heavy, unmistakable smell of hot oil and exhaust radiating from his 1978 Harley-Davidson shovelhead. Jackson didn't look like a man who belonged anywhere near Crestwood. He was a towering figure, broad-shouldered and weathered, with a thick, silver-streaked beard and deep crow's feet etched around his piercing blue eyes. He wore sun-faded denim, heavy steel-toed boots, and, most prominently, his worn leather cut. Emblazoned on his back was the iconic death head insignia, loudly and proudly proclaiming his lifelong membership in the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. He was a man who had lived 1,000 lives on the asphalt. Decades ago, he was running with his brothers, living day by day, mile by mile. But Jackson possessed a razor-sharp intellect that outpaced the wildness of his youth. Over 30 years, he had quietly turned a modest mechanic shop into a regional empire of custom garages, which then funded a pivot into commercial real estate. Today, Jackson was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He operated through a web of faceless LLCs and corporate proxies. To the world, Montgomery Holdings was a monolithic corporate entity. To the Hells Angels, Jackson was simply a brother who had done very, very well for himself, but never forgot where he came from. He killed the engine. The sudden silence that fell over the immaculate brick courtyard was deafening. Crestwood wasn't just a resort, it was a sanctuary for the elite, a place where tech billionaires, old-money aristocrats, and Hollywood royalty paid a staggering 6-figure annual premium just to walk through the wrought iron gates. Jackson casually kicked the kickstand down, leaned back, and pulled a slightly crushed cigar from his chest pocket. He had just ridden 300 miles non-stop from a club run in Nevada. He was tired, permanently etched in road grime, and looking forward to a very specific, very expensive steak. Before he could even strike a match, the aggressive roar of a twin-turbo V12 shattered the quiet. A sleek, metallic silver Aston Martin DBS swung into the courtyard, taking the corner far too fast. It screeched to a halt, just inches from Jackson's vintage Harley. The gull-wing doors swung upward, and out stepped Preston Harrington. Preston was the textbook definition of new money entitlement. Heir to a massive corporate logistics fortune, he was dressed in a tailored pale blue linen suit that cost more than most people made in a month. His hair was impeccably styled, and his wrist bore a flashy, diamond-encrusted watch that practically blinded anyone looking at it. Emerging from the passenger side was his wife, Cecilia, a woman, draped in high-end designer logos, clutching a tiny, trembling, purebred dog to her chest. Preston took one look at Jackson, then at the Harley, and his face twisted into a mask of profound disgust. "Hey," Preston barked, his voice echoing off the marble pillars of the resort's entrance. "Are you deaf, old man? Move that piece of junk right now." Jackson paused, the unlit cigar resting between his teeth. He turned his head slowly, taking in the sight of the flushed, angry young millionaire. Jackson didn't say a word. He just stared, his icy blue eyes completely unreadable. "Did you hear him?" Cecilia chimed in, her voice shrill and heavily laced with condescension. She dramatically raised a manicured hand to cover her nose. "Preston, it smells like a landfill. Tell him to move." "I can breathe," I said move the bike, Preston demanded, stepping closer, emboldened by Jackson's silence. He gestured aggressively toward the Aston Martin. Do you have any idea how much this car is worth? If your leaking rust bucket gets oil anywhere near my tires, I'll sue you for everything you own, which, judging by the look of you, is exactly nothing. Jackson finally struck a match against the zipper of his leather jacket, lit his cigar, and took a slow, deliberate drag. He blew a thick cloud of smoke into the ocean breeze. Parking lot's plenty big, son, Jackson said, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone that commanded an effortless authority. You got about 3 empty acres over there. I suggest you use 'em. Preston's face flushed a deep crimson. He wasn't used to being told no, especially not by someone he viewed as lower class. He took a step toward Jackson, puffing out his chest. Listen to me, you gang-banging piece of trash. I am Preston Harrington. I am a platinum-tier member of this club. I spend more here in a weekend than you will see in your miserable, pathetic lifetime. This spot right by the door, this is for VIPs. Not for washed-up thugs having a midlife crisis. Cecilia clutched Preston's arm, glaring at Jackson's leather cut. Preston, look at his jacket. He's one of those Hells Angels people. He's probably a criminal. Don't get too close, he might have a weapon. We need to get management out here right now. You're entirely right, darling, Preston sneered, pulling out his phone. I don't know how you got past the front gate, biker. Maybe the security guard was asleep, or maybe you hopped the fence. But you've made a massive mistake. You're entirely too poor, and frankly too dirty, to be breathing the air up here. Jackson leaned casually against the handlebars of his shovel head. He didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply watched the Harringtons with a faint, amused smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. I'd be careful, boy, Jackson murmured softly. Sometimes you can't tell who owns the road just by looking at the shoes they're wearing. Preston let out a harsh, mocking laugh. Is that supposed to be some sort of redneck philosophy? Save it for the trailer park. He turned toward the massive glass doors of the resort. Ballet, manager. Get out here right now. Within seconds, the heavy mahogany and glass doors of the Crestwood estate swung open. Out rushed Richard, the club's general manager. Richard was a tall, overly groomed man in a sharp tuxedo, his face permanently set in an expression of anxious sycophancy. He had only been hired 3 months ago, specifically poached from an elite country club in London to elevate Crestwood's prestigious atmosphere. Mutt. Behind Richard trailed 2 young valets and a burly security guard wearing an earpiece. Mr. Harrington. Mrs. Harrington. Welcome back, Richard gasped, practically bowing as he hurried down the marble steps. I am so terribly sorry. I didn't see you pull up. How can we be of service? Richard, Preston snapped, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at Jackson. I want this creature removed from the property immediately. Look at him. Look at his disgusting motorcycle. He's harassing my wife. He's taking up a premium drop-off zone, and he's completely ignoring my instructions to leave. Richard turned his gaze toward Jackson, and his eyes widened in horror. To Richard, whose entire life revolved around catering to billionaires, politicians, and celebrities, Jackson was a walking nightmare. The dust, the boots, the Hells Angels patches, it was a catastrophic breach of Crestwood's strict dress code and moral clauses. Sir, Richard said, marching over to Jackson with his chest puffed out, attempting to project authority. I am the general manager of this establishment. You are trespassing on private property. The Crestwood estate is a private, members-only facility. I must ask you to get on your motorcycle and leave the premises immediately. Jackson took another slow drag of his cigar. I ain't trespassing, Richard. Richard blinked, slightly taken aback that the biker had read his name tag. Regardless, You are not a member here. Our membership committee strictly forbids individuals affiliated with known criminal organizations. He gestured distastefully at Jackson's patches. Now, please leave, before I am forced to have the authorities remove you. Are you deaf, Richard? Cecilia shrieked, her tiny dog yapping in unison. Don't ask him nicely. Have security drag him out. He's probably scoping the place out to rob it. Jackson tapped a bit of ash onto the immaculate cobblestone. I came here for a steak, Richard. A bone-in ribeye, medium rare. And maybe a quiet table by the water. Preston burst into a fit of hysterical mocking laughter. A steak? Did you hear that, Richard? The biker wants a table. Hey, Grandpa, do you even have a bank account? A dinner for two here costs $1,000. You'd have to sell that rusted pile of scrap metal you rode in on just to buy a glass of water. Richard's face hardened. He was desperate to please the Harringtons. Preston was currently in talks to host his company's massive annual gala at the resort, a contract worth millions. Richard could not afford to let this situation ruin his relationship with a young billionaire. That is enough, Richard said coldly. He turned to the security guard. Call the local police department. Tell them we have a hostile, aggressive trespasser refusing to leave. And call the towing company. We're having this motorcycle impounded. You sure you want to make that call, Richard? Jackson asked, his voice still terrifyingly calm. Once you make that call, things are gonna change around here, and you can't unring that bell. Is that a threat? Preston yelled, stepping behind the security guard. Did you hear him? He's threatening the manager. Typical gang trash. You people think the rules don't apply to you. No threat, Jackson replied, resting his massive hands on his belt. Just a fact. You see, I happen to know the owner of this little establishment, and I have a feeling he wouldn't be too happy with how you treat the guests. Richard scoffed, rolling his eyes dramatically. You know the owner? Please. The Crestwood estate was recently acquired by Montgomery Holdings, a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm. The owner is a faceless board of directors who wouldn't be caught dead within 100 miles of someone like you. Your bluffs are as pathetic as your wardrobe. Have the bike towed, Richard, Cecilia demanded, stomping her designer heel. I am feeling incredibly unsafe. If he is not gone in 5 minutes, Preston and I are leaving, and we will be canceling the gala contract. I won't have my friends subjected to this. That was the oberetral, the last thing Richard needed to hear. Panic flashed in the manager's eyes. He nodded fiercely to the security guard. Do it. Call the police right now. Have him arrested. The security guard, however, was hesitating. The guard, an older man named Davis, who had worked at the property for nearly a decade, was staring hard at Jackson. Davis wasn't looking at the dirt or the beard. He was looking at Jackson's posture, his unflinching demeanor, and a very specific, heavy silver ring on Jackson's right hand, a ring that bore a crest Davis swore he had seen on official corporate letterheads. Mr. Manager, Davis whispered, leaning in, maybe we should wait a second. Let's just figure out who he is first. I don't care who he is, Richard shouted, losing his polished veneer completely. He is trash. He is a thug. Get him off my driveway. Jackson sighed heavily. He reached into the inner pocket of his leather cut. Immediately Preston flinched, pulling his wife back, assuming the biker was reaching for a weapon. Instead, Jackson pulled out a battered, scratched-up smartphone. All right, Richard, Jackson said, dialing a number. You had your chance to handle this like a gentleman. Let's do it the hard way. He held the phone to his ear. The courtyard was dead silent, save for the hum of the Aston Martin's engine and the distant crash of the ocean waves. Yeah, it's me, Jackson said into the phone, his eyes locked dead onto Preston Harrington's pale face. I'm out front. Bring the paperwork. The courtyard of the Crestwood estate fell into an agonizing, suffocating silence. Preston Harrington had a smug, victorious grin plastered across his face, fully expecting a squad of police cruisers to come barreling down the driveway at any second. Cecilia was busy smoothing out her designer dress, muttering under her breath about how the smell of motorcycle exhaust was going to permanently ruin her Chanel fabric. Richard, the general manager, stood with his arms crossed, his chin tilted up in an arrogant display of false dominance. He was mentally drafting the incident report, already planning how he would frame this to the corporate board as a heroic defense of Crestwood's elite standards. 2 minutes passed, then 3. Suddenly, the heavy glass doors of the resort slid open. However, it wasn't the police. It wasn't a towing company. Walking out of the air-conditioned lobby was William Hastings. Hastings was a legend in a corporate legal world, a ruthless, brilliant senior partner at the prestigious law firm of Kirkland & Ellis. He was dressed in a sharp charcoal gray Tom Ford suit, carrying a thick leather briefcase. Flanking him with 2 junior executives, both holding tablets and looking incredibly stressed. Richard's posture immediately changed. He recognized William Hastings instantly. Hastings was the lead legal representative for Montgomery Holdings, the faceless corporate titan that had purchased the Crestwood estate 6 months prior. Richard had been terrified of Hastings since the day he took the job. "Mr. Hastings." Richard gasped, his voice cracking slightly. He aggressively shoved past Preston and practically sprinted up the marble steps. "Sir, I had no idea you were on the property today. I am so sorry for this disturbance. We are dealing with a trespasser right now. The police are on their way to remove this biker." Hastings didn't even look at Richard. He walked right past the panicked general manager, completely ignoring the extended hand. Hastings marched straight down the steps, across the immaculate cobblestone, and stopped directly in front of the dust-covered, leather-clad Hell's Angel. To the absolute horror of everyone watching, the ruthless corporate shark bowed his head slightly. "Jackson," Hastings said, his voice calm and respectful. "I apologize for the delay. We were reviewing the final quarterly statements in the penthouse conference room. The acquisition papers for the Denver commercial properties are ready for your signature, exactly as you requested." Jackson Montgomery pulled the cigar from his mouth and exhaled a long, slow plume of smoke. "Thanks, Bill. Sorry to drag you out into the heat. We had a little snag at the front door." Richard's brain short-circuited. His mouth opened and closed like a dying fish. He looked from the impeccably tailored billionaire lawyer to the gritty, bearded biker, and back again. "Mr. Hastings," Richard stammered, the blood rapidly draining from his face. I don't understand. Why are you speaking to him? This man is a gang member. He's a trespasser." Hastings slowly turned on his heel to face Richard. The look in the lawyer's eyes was cold enough to freeze water. "Richard, is it?" Hastings asked quietly. "Yes, sir. General Manager," Richard replied, his voice trembling. "Well, Richard," Hastings said, adjusting his cuffs, "it appears your tenure as General Manager has been remarkably short-lived. Allow me to introduce you to the man you just threatened to have arrested. This is Jackson Montgomery. He is the founder, chairman, and sole shareholder of Montgomery Holdings." Cecilia Harrington dropped her purebred dog. It hit the cobblestone with a yelp and scurried under the Aston Martin. Preston's smug grin vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. The color left his face so fast he looked as though he were going to be violently ill. He is the owner?" Richard whispered, his legs physically shaking. No, that's impossible. He's wearing a Hell's Angels jacket. He rides a piece of junk." Jackson chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound that echoed across the quiet courtyard. He walked over to his 1978 Harley-Davidson and affectionately patted the leather seat. "This piece of junk was built with my own 2 hands 40 years ago, Richard, Jackson said, his voice turning hard. And my brothers in the club, they had my back when I didn't have 2 dimes to rub together. I don't hide where I came from, and I certainly don't let a cheap suit in a fancy lobby tell me where I can and cannot park on my own damn driveway. Preston Harrington, desperate to salvage the catastrophic situation, pushed his way forward. His arrogant swagger was completely gone, replaced by the desperate, fawning panic of a man who realized he had just stepped on a landmine. "Mr. Montgomery," Preston practically squeaked, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "Sir, this is all a massive misunderstanding. I had absolutely no idea who you were. If I had known, I never would have." "Never would have what?" Jackson interrupted, his icy blue eyes locking onto the young millionaire. "You wouldn't have called me trash. You wouldn't have treated me like dirt. You see, son, that's the problem with people like you. You only respect the money. You don't respect the man. You thought I was poor, so you thought I wasn't human." No, please," Preston begged, sweat beading on his forehead. "My name is Preston Harrington. My father is Arthur Harrington, of Harrington Logistics. We are platinum members here. We run in the same corporate circles. Please, let me buy you that steak." "Let me apologize." Jackson paused. He looked at Preston, and turned to look at William Hastings. A slow, dangerous smile crept across Jackson's weathered face. "Harrington Logistics," Jackson murmured. He looked back at Preston. "Bill, doesn't that name sound familiar?" Hastings opened his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of manila folders. He flipped through them methodically. "Yes, Jackson. It should sound very familiar. Harrington Logistics has been severely over-leveraged for the past 5 years. They are drowning in over $400 million of toxic debt." Preston froze. Cecilia looked at her husband in confusion. "Preston, what is he talking about? You said the company was having a record year." "Shut up, Cecilia," Preston hissed, his eyes wide with panic. "Record year?" Jackson laughed harshly. He stepped closer to Preston, towering over the younger man. The smell of leather, tobacco, and raw power radiated off the biker. "Your daddy's company is bleeding out, Preston. You're floating on high-interest corporate loans. That flashy Aston Martin, leased. Your wife's diamonds, probably insured to the hilt because you know the repo men are circling. You play the part of a billionaire, but your balance sheet is a graveyard." Preston swallowed hard. He looked like a trapped animal. How could you possibly know our internal financials?" "Because," Jackson said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper, "for the last 3 weeks my private equity firm has been quietly buying up your company's debt. Your father came to my board on his hands and knees begging for a buyout. He wanted Montgomery Holdings to acquire a 60% controlling stake to save Harrington Logistics from filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy next month." The silence in the courtyard was absolute. Even the ocean seemed to hold its breath. Preston staggered backward until his back hit the door of his leased Aston Martin. His entire life, the country clubs, the cars, the arrogant facade was crumbling before his eyes. "We were going to finalize the term sheet on Friday," Jackson continued, shaking his head slowly. "I actually liked your old man. Arthur is a grinder. He built that company from scratch, much like I did. I was going to bail him out. But then I meet his son. I meet the heir to the throne, and I see a spoiled, arrogant, cruel little boy who insults strangers and threatens hard-working people just to stroke his own fragile ego. Mr. Montgomery, please." Preston cried out, tears actually forming in the corners of his eyes. "Don't do this. My father will kill me. The company is his entire life." "It was," Jackson corrected him coldly. He turned to his lead counsel. Bill, call the board. Pull the Harrington term sheet. We are walking away from the deal. Let the creditors tear them apart. Understood, Jackson, Hastings said, immediately pulling out his cell phone. No, wait! Cecilia screamed, finally grasping the gravity of the situation. You can't do this. We'll lose everything. The house in Malibu, the cars, you can't just ruin our lives because of a parking spot. I didn't ruin your life, lady, Jackson said, turning his back on them. Your husband's mouth did. You reap what you sow. Jackson then turned his attention to Richard, the general manager, who was practically trying to melt into the marble pillars to escape notice. Richard, Jackson said sharply. Yes, Mr. Montgomery, Richard squeaked, standing at strict attention. You're fired, Jackson stated bluntly. You have exactly 10 minutes to clear out your desk. If you are still on my property in 11 minutes, I will have you arrested for trespassing. Richard let out a pathetic whimper, his shoulders slumping in total defeat. He turned and scurried back into the resort, a broken man. Jackson then looked at the burly security guard, Davis, who had been watching the entire spectacle with wide, astonished eyes. Davis was the only one who had hesitated, the only one who had tried to treat the situation with a shred of dignity. Davis, was it? Jackson asked. Yes, sir, the guard replied, standing tall. You've got good instincts, Davis, Jackson said, pulling a massive wad of $100 bills from his jeans pocket and peeling off 5 of them. He handed the $500 to the stunned guard. You're the new head of security for Crestwood. Effective immediately. I'll have HR draft the paperwork and double your salary by tomorrow morning. Davis stared at the money, then up at the billionaire biker. Thank you, Mr. Montgomery. I won't let you down. Though, I know you won't, Jackson said. He gestured over his shoulder toward the weeping Preston and his hysterical wife. Now, as your first act as head of security, I want you to revoke the Harrington's platinum membership, cut up their cards, and then escort these non-members off my property. With pleasure, sir, Davis smiled, pulling his radio from his belt. Jackson Montgomery didn't wait to watch the Harringtons get escorted away. He didn't care to listen to Preston's sobbing apologies or Cecilia's angry shrieks. He had made his point. He flicked his cigar ash into a nearby brass receptacle, adjusted his heavy leather Hell's Angels cut, and walked up the marble steps into the grand lobby of the Crestwood estate. The staff inside immediately parted like the Red Sea, staring in awe at the rugged biker who owned the ground they stood on. Jackson walked straight through the opulent dining room, bypassing the line of wealthy patrons waiting for a table. He sat down at the best table in the house, overlooking the crashing waves of the Pacific Ocean. A terrified, trembling waiter rushed over with a crystal water glass. Mr. Montgomery. Welcome. What can I get for you today, sir? Jackson smiled, leaning back in his chair. I'd like a bone-in ribeye, son. Medium rare, and a cold beer. Money talks, but wealth listens. And for the Harringtons, the silence of their impending bankruptcy would be the loudest lesson they ever learned. True power doesn't need a designer suit to demand respect. Sometimes it wears worn leather, rides a shovel head, and holds all the cards. Never judge a book by its cover, because you never know who holds the pen to your final chapter. Arrogance will always cost you everything when you least expect it. If you loved the sweet karma in this story and want more epic tales of instant justice, like this video, share it with your friends and subscribe to the channel for daily drama. Stay humble, everyone.